Well, we've had another mass shooting that looks like it may have come from someone who was on the right, at least at some point in his life. He bears the signs of someone who was. It's even suggested that he may have been a Trump supporter. I am not saying that violence only comes from Trump supporters, and I'm not saying, that violence only comes from the right, nor am I saying that violence never comes from the left. But let's take a look at the story, and then I want to make a few points, especially if you're a Christian who supports MAGA. uh, I just want to make a few points from our beliefs, our Christian beliefs, that would hopefully make you have second thoughts before you assume that no violence can come from the right. I grew up on the right as a conservative. I was conservative most of my life until Trump came along in 2015 when I started seeing, wait a minute. Actually, I started seeing it a few years earlier when I got involved in the Tea Party movement. And the closer I got to that movement, I started to see things I didn't like. I started to see a lot of hatred. I saw some violent tendencies, at least through words. People would talk very violently, which gave me concern. And it was almost like the closer I got to the people who were really involved in that movement, the more I started to think as a Christian, this is not really something I can support. And it's not because I had become liberal, but it's because I held them up, as I did Democrats, to biblical teachings. And they weren't measuring up. They weren't measuring up in different ways than I saw Democrats not measuring up, but nonetheless, they weren't measuring up. Whether you don't measure up on the right or on the left, it doesn't matter. If you don't measure up to a biblical standard, then Christians shouldn't support it. Okay. So let's take a look at this guy. Mormon church gunman was a Marine who supported Trump. And it says down here in the article, the gunman who rammed his truck into a Mormon church and opened fire on worshipers was an Iraq war veteran who had previously shown support for Donald Trump. Okay, so doesn't mean he supported Trump on the day he did this. Maybe he was converted by the left. I don't know. But at least at one point in his life, it seems he was a Trump supporter. I'm not blaming Trump for this by any means. But, we had the other guy, the Charlie Kirk guy, who also grew up in a MAGA family. Now, they say he became a leftist or a liberal. I don't know. Maybe he did. But the point is, in that case, we've always said if you raise people right, you raise them in Christian homes, you raise them with a mother and father, mom and dad, then things are far more likely to turn out right. And that guy turned out wrong. Regardless of what he believed when he did it, we know he did grow up in a very conservative and MAGA supporting household with a mom and a dad. Something went wrong. Something went wrong. I'm not blaming their conservative beliefs for sure. Look, we have, let's say, 100 million people on both sides. We have 100 million conservatives, let's say, and 100 million liberals in this country. One or two or three, even 300 mass killings a year like this. And I believe there's been about 300 so far this year. But that number compared to 300 million is minuscule. It's tiny for any of us to say that's the fault of the left or that's the fault of the right is wrong. What's also wrong is for those who claim that, well, let me just give the example of the president and the people on the right now. They're saying, oh, Democrats and liberals are causing all this violence because they call us fascist. And yet Trump just came out and said he's declaring the whole Democratic Party a terrorist organization. A terrorist organization. In other words, he's claiming that nearly half the country are terrorists. Now, what do you think is more likely to make people want to kill somebody? Believing they're terrorist or believing they're fascist? If you believe they're fascist, you disagree, you fight them in the political realm. But if you believe they're terrorists, you believe they could kill you at any moment and you got to stop them. So to me, that would seem to make people more prone to violent action as a measure that they would view as defensive to protect themselves or to protect others from these so-called terrorists on the left. So, For them to come out and say what they're saying, which is far worse than I've heard anybody on the left has said. I've never heard anyone on the left say that MAGA is a terrorist organization or a terrorist group or has terrorist tendencies. Never. Yet the people on the right are saying that, and at the same time, they're saying because the left calls them fascists, that that's what's causing the violence. No, if you don't want to be called fascist, then don't be a fascist. But if somebody correctly and truthfully and accurately characterizes your political views as what they are, that's not a license for murder. It's certainly not a license for that. That's a political disagreement, and that's what this country excels at. We excel, at least we have, it seems up until recently anyway, we've excelled at political disagreements, at having ways and procedures and institutions in place that facilitate political disagreement without it ever turning violent. So that's what we need to strive for and try to get back to. You want to make America great again, make it so we can disagree without all the rancor and all the bitterness and all the hatred. That would help a lot. Anyway, this gunman, Thomas Jacob Sanford, 40, from suburban Michigan, killed at least 4 people in the attack on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a Mormon church in Grand Blanc Township on Sunday in Michigan. Anyway, so the ex-Marine was killed by police after he shot at least 10 people with an assault rifle in what the FBI described as an act of targeted violence. Authorities have yet to provide a motive. So there you have it. They don't yet have a motive. I'm not going to say he did it because he was a Trump supporter. Plus, it doesn't make any sense that he would do it because he's a Trump supporter, because Mormons are Trump supporters by and large. So that wouldn't make any sense. So something's off with this story. But look, you can see his truck. American flags in the back. You don't see that much on the left, do you? Again, I'm not saying that this had anything to do with what he did. I'm just saying, from outward appearances, it doesn't look too liberal here. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, like they said, they haven't yet provided a motive. He also went by the name of Jake, graduated from a nearby high school and all that, before joining the Marine Corps. A lot of conservatives join the Marines. Liberals join the Marines too. But I would say it's probably majority conservative. His recent political views, though, remain unclear. But he was seen wearing a camouflage Trump 2020 campaign shirt emblazoned with the words, "Make liberals cry again," in a picture posted on social media in 2019. Now, I was going to say, if he wore this shirt to this killing, that wouldn't say much because, we had that Minnesota killing a while back, a few months ago, where they killed the representatives in Minnesota, and or at least one representative, and then another one's husband or wife or spouse. I forget which. But anyway, the guy had no Kings cards in his car to make it look like he was opposed to Trump. In other words, he was trying to make it look like he was someone on the left and that a leftist was killing these Democrats in Minnesota. And I saw that immediately and I thought, but that doesn't mean he was on the left. I mean, anybody could put cards with no kings written on them in their car, especially if they wanted to pull the wool over our eyes about who they really were. So if he had worn this T-shirt to this killing, wouldn't have really meant much. But the fact is, he posted this on his social media in 2019, 6 years ago. That would seem to indicate possibly that he was on the right, at least at that point. Another thing, it's not certainly not conclusive, but it says an image of Sanford's home taken on Google Street View in June of this year, showed a June of last year, I guess, showed a Trump Pence sign attached to his garden fence. Okay, not usually the sign of a leftist that they would have Trump signs in their yard, but maybe. Other images showed him to be an avid hunter, posing with killed deer and other game in the back of a silver truck that appeared similar to the one used to storm the church. All right. So look at this. Look at this wreckage. Why did he burn it like that? This is really crazy stuff. He drove a pickup truck with two U.S. flags strapped to its back into the side of the church at 10:25 a.m. local time, right during church time. So yeah, honestly, none of this makes sense. Why would a Trump supporter set a church on fire that's filled with people who are probably most likely Trump supporters? Doesn't make any sense. But here's my main point. Um, what makes less sense is to assume that no one on the right can kill people, that these types of things never come from the right. I mean, just one thing, if you think about it, why would anyone think that the party that is most insistent upon completely unrestrained gun ownership would never exhibit any tendency toward violence? If there are no violent tendencies among them, why are they so insistent upon no government restrictions at all on gun ownership? I mean, they cry bloody heck if the government dares to impose, the slightest restriction on gun ownership, and they demand that they must be able to use the most powerful weapons ever known to man. Um, and there should be no restrictions on that. I just don't understand why we would think people so in love with guns that not a single killer could come from that group of millions and millions of people. Look, I'm not trying to defame the name of everyone on the right by saying this, because obviously the vast majority of people on the right don't do this. They don't do it, as the vast majority of people on the left don't do it. I mean, literally 99.9999999% of the people on either side don't do these things. And I know most Republicans and conservatives don't support this, no matter what side it comes from. But stop blaming the other side and stop saying it can never come from your side. If you're on the left, it can come from your side. If you're on the right, it can come from your side. I'm telling you, I began to see violent tendencies on the right in the 2010s when I was a big supporter of the Tea Party movement, which is actually was the forerunner to the MAGA movement. This is all the same people from the Tea Party. It's now MAGA people. And but the closer I got to it, the more I began to see like real hatred and tendencies towards violence, because they would talk about violence all the time. Talk about it. Yeah, it was just talk. But what does Jesus say? Jesus said, if you have hatred in your heart, it's tantamount to murder. And what comes out of your mouth shows what's in your heart. So yeah, these people had hatred in their heart, and hatred is the forerunner to murder. So yeah, of course, someone on the right could murder people. And it's happened. And people on the left have done the same. We got to quit saying it can't come from our side and it can only come from the other side. That's so polarizing. And it's turning people who none of whom want to commit any kind of violence, is turning them against each other. It's pitting everybody on one side against everybody on the other side. Why do we want to do that? Why are we, you know, why are MAGA Christians so supportive of a man who preaches hate? It started off mainly, his hate was aimed at people in the media who didn't like him, and immigrants. During the campaign last year, it was aimed mainly at immigrants. Now it's aimed at literally half the country. It's aimed at all Democrats. He said the other day that he sees the Democratic Party as a terrorist organization. Anyway, these shootings are happening so often now, it's really getting hard to keep up with them. And I have to ask, what do you think MAGA would be saying right now if Biden was, or if Harris was president? Yeah, they would be going berserk. The country's falling apart under this president. This president is a disaster. All this violence taking place under this president. And they're silent. They're silent on Trump. Let me show you something. This is a chart of these mass shootings in the United States between January and July of this year. Look at this. From January, February, March, April was relatively low. And what was Trump and the administration doing during that time? They were actively working as hard as they could and as fast, quickly as they could to tear down all our institutions of government, including law enforcement. They were firing people in the FBI. They were telling people to quit and retire in the FBI. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people quit. Um, then they started tasking these people. Look, here's April, May, June. In May, the mass shootings started skyrocketing. Right around the time they started tasking hundreds of FBI agents to read through all the Epstein files and see if Trump's name was anywhere in them, and apparently to white out the name wherever it appeared. And look at this. The number of mass shootings skyrocketed during that time. It almost tripled. It basically tripled. So, there used to be a time in this country when the FBI and a lot of government agencies did a thing called threat assessment and threat management. They would detect things like this sometimes, not always, and they certainly weren't perfect at it. Nobody could be. But a lot of times they would stop these kinds of events before they happened, especially big ones where, like these last two, these most recent two, really big ones. A lot of times they were able to stop those things, but how could we expect them to keep doing that now when they're literally out in our cities arresting immigrants? Their job has gone from threat assessment and threat management, investigating all these clues and tips that would come in. Tips would come in. My neighbor's son seems to be doing some bad things. I think he might be a threat. They would investigate those threats. They would investigate those tips. But how can they do that? They're out on the streets of New York and Los Angeles and Des Moines and arresting immigrants, most of whom were actually here legally, and most of whom, the vast majority of whom, have never committed a crime since they've been here. That's what our FBI, that's what our Department of Justice is focused on now. How can we expect them to keep doing this great job of finding threats and stopping them before they occur when they're so distracted with meaningless stuff, with jobs that are so unimportant compared to the jobs they were hired to do? They're literally spending time, hundreds of hours, and hundreds of agents of the FBI going through Epstein files. The DOJ is spending all its time trying to prosecute Trump's political enemies, not criminals, not real criminals. James Comey, come on. Is he a real danger to society? Should we be putting millions of dollars of the Department of Justice's time and energy into that? There's real crime going on out there that's hurting people. Who was Jim Comey hurting? Nobody. And I can tell you, he's absolutely innocent of these bogus charges. All right, don't get me started. I got to stop while I'm ahead before I go on for another half hour. Anyway, that's basically what I wanted to say. And I don't know, I hope it helps a little bit. Just remember, if you're a Christian and a MAGA supporter, or if you're a Christian on the left, I know you guys think there can't be Christians on that side or the other side. There are, okay? There's Christians on all sides. But as a Christian, you got to know violence can come from all sides. All people are sinners. So you can't have a group of 150 million people over here and another group of 150 million over there, and no sin comes from this group, but all sin comes from the other group. It doesn't work that way. All right? We're all in this together. We got to pull together and work together to stop this, and we got to stop fostering and creating hate for the other side. All right? Let's do it. All right? Take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.